If you are even considering watching your cast bar go from left to right while your mana bar goes right to left, you are going to want to know the stuff that's in this video. I always play Rogue and Hunter, but I'm thinking about a caster DPS for number 3. So I've been doing a lot of investigating, and you guys know I have a very unique perspective on the game, so this video is going to be focused on the feel, the scaling, the convenience, and having a good overall TBC experience in PvE content. We're going to be talking about 5 classes here, 2 pure casters and the 3 hybrid casters. And we'll start with the Boomkin. Balanced Druids are providing arguably the most useful support buffs and debuffs in the entire game. No matter what you're doing, improved Fairy Fire and Moonkin Aura are just insanely powerful. So you get a raid spot, but do Boomkins actually do good damage? Well, not really, especially not at the start. Boomkins scale very well with their own individual stats. They choose to spam Starfire over Wrath because of Starfire's massive 100% spell power coefficient, which is balanced by the fact that it's a very long cast. You get some good stats from your talents, but they're not like the best, and in the first phase, you could easily find yourself at the bottom of the DPS meter. It does get better as the game goes on, but the main thing that's hurting you is that Arcane is just not a very good spell school. Your mana regen also scales. You double dip from Dream State scaling with your int and intensity scaling with your passive mana regen. So at the start, everybody kind of has mana issues, but you definitely will. Boomkin feels pretty bad early, but you'll always be there and you'll slowly start to climb up from the bottom. So by contrast, Elemental Shamans have an extremely similar talent to Dream State with Unrelenting Storm. It does literally the exact same thing but costs 2 more talent points for some reason. And then they also have flat mana regen with Water Shield, as well as Mana Spring Totem. You have less mana problems as your crit goes up because Shamans have a unique clear casting that's very unlike the Mages. It procs on every single crit and reduces the cost of your next 2 spells by 40%. Elemental Shamans do relatively good damage at the start of the game, but they scale very terribly. The Lightning Bolt spell power coefficient is pretty bad, and the Nature School is slightly better than Arcane because of the Storm Strike debuff, but it's still not good. Elemental is the only caster with 0 additional spell power scaling from their talents. Instead, you get Elemental Overload, which gives your spells a 20% chance to fire another one that does half damage. Elemental generally gets a ton of raw stats from their talents and totems. They also have a very unique problem with how they interact with Fire Elemental Totem. Snapshotting this one ability alone with a full set of spell power gear on is incredibly overpowered. Enhance and Resto Shamans can and should do this before a fight, but even though you already have all that spell power on, which would be perfect for this, Totem of Wrath is also a fire totem and can't be used at the same time as Fire Elemental. So that feels pretty bad, but outside of that, I would highly recommend Elemental as a cozy caster and probably just DPS in general. If you're new to the game or you have a friend that's getting into the game, it's a fantastic choice. It has the 3rd best AoE on this list for Magma Totem, Chain Lightning, and using Fire Elemental on trash. You're also the only DPS that can spot heal without dropping Moonkin or Shadow Form. In the end, Elemental's a trade-off. You get front-loaded low-skill base damage in exchange for no skill ceiling or scaling later. Now for the last hybrid, Shadow Priest. You get to use the Shadow Spell School, which is the best one in the game, but you're also the reason why it's the best. The unique things about Shadow Priest are that you have a school-based spell power modified talent and debuff. So instead of just more spell power on Frostbolt or something, you get it on all shadow spells with darkness. And of course, you apply Shadow Weaving. You are the only one in this video without a crit modifier, but dots and channels can't crit in TBC, so you don't really care that much. Your talent tree has 10% hit and lots of percent increased damage that will scale really well. But what is not going to scale very well is your main ability, Mind Flay, and even with the Shadow Reach talent, it caps out at a 24-yard range. The complexity of the Shadow Priest rotation mainly comes from just trying to avoid actually casting Mind Flay and casting everything else that you can. That includes Night Elf Star Shards, which becomes a dot in TBC, but it's also not a Shadow School. If you could spam apply multiple Shadow Word Pains, your damage would actually just skyrocket. Your mana regen is also entirely scaling with the 30% while casting that you get from Meditation, and the mana that you get back from your own Vampiric Touch is 5% of your damage, so that's going to go up with more stats and better gear over time, and then you won't have mana issues. The Shadow Priest problem isn't exactly that it's low damage, it's that its best button is its worst spell. Now, who gets to benefit the most from the Shadow School being so good? Warlocks. It's a really common myth that Shadow Bolt has crazy good spell power scaling. Even if you include the Shadow and Flame talent, it's not like it's super high above everything else. What is making it scale like crazy is shadow damage multipliers. So in optimized situations where you're able to get those shadow damage multipliers, you pop off single target. And then when you don't have those in pugs or dungeons, you still get to abuse Seed of Corruption AoE, which is most useful in those situations. This time around, we even have dual spec, so that means you could swap to an SM/SL spec, and then summon an imp, and that'll give you 20% less threat generated from Master Demonologist for even more aggressive seed spamming, and threat reduction is normally the only thing that this class doesn't have. Affliction brings some utility with an added 3% to their cursive elements from talents, but they also have a slightly more complicated rotation by wanting to actually use their dots. Just having life tap alone solves all your mana problems, but it even scales with Shadow spell power. If you were drawn to Elemental due to the lack of complicated mechanics, but you actually want to see yourself on the meters, Warlock has a place in any environment without overthinking it. I'll also mention the forbidden Warlock PvE spec, Demonology. If you compare the end of the Demonology tree, it just does not stack up to the other two trees, but what it does have is really good raw stats. Using Demonic Knowledge with a Felguard provides a great amount of just raw flat spell power, and that makes it a great option if you're leveling or your gear is just insanely bad for some reason. But outside of that, you probably want to keep it to PvP. And another great thing for PvP is the Mage. The general idea with the Mage is you go Arcane, you spam Arcane Blast, you get a Shadow Priest, and you soak up all the innervates. Arcane is actually a very amazing talent tree. While it does have a spell power modifier, it only applies to Arcane missiles, and so you generally avoid that talent. Your other damage scaling talents are through intellect instead of spell power. And weirdly, none of these talents ever mention Arcane Blast specifically. You subspec Frost to get 2 Icy Veins, and you are the only caster in this list with access to more than 30% mana regen while casting, because you can get it twice from Mage Armor and then again from Arcane Meditation. But for maximum damage, you won't actually want to do that and instead use Molten Armor. This class really pops off in Phase 2 whenever they get their T5 2-set. What generally turns people away from the Mage is not the burden of execution, it's literally just spamming one button, it's the mana issues. That one button has average spell power scaling. What makes it good is that you can just mash out so many of them so quickly at the expense of your mana. And since that cost can be avoided with raid support, people really undervalue the downside when talking about Mage, but that generally is not in your individual control. So what do you do if you can't get mana support or you're in some kind of casual environment? Well, with dual spec, you could easily just swap to Fire. The spell fire items have arcane and fire damage on them, so you can use mostly the same gear. Fire is the second best spell school in the game, and that's mostly because of you applying the improved Scorch debuff. Fireball is very similar to Starfire with great scaling and a very long cast time. You have a spell power mod on it with Empowered Fireball and crit mod with Ignite. Fire mages, warriors, and paladins are the only ones in TBC with access to increased damage on low health targets with your Molten Fury talent. And that 20% health of the boss can be a very long time in unoptimized environments. In some situations, like a melee stacked Karazhan without a Shadow Priest, I'd rather play Fire than Arcane in order to maximize overall damage, and minimize the amount of time that I'm drinking instead of actually killing stuff. Fire can enable Fire Warlocks, and Arcane requires coordination, so discuss with your guild and use sims to determine which option is best for you. In the end, Arcane scales with your raid being good, and Fire scales with your raid being bad. I'll also mention the final caster spec, Frost. Frost has Cold Snap and Water Elemental, which can give you a minute and a half of your pet being out during a fight, which provides some pretty decent base damage. It gets Bloodlusted, and Water Bolt has a 68.7 spell power coefficient. The real nail in the coffin for this spec is Water Bolt does not benefit from your other Frost talents besides you applying Winter's Chill debuff to the target, so it misses out on stuff like Ice Shards, which is insanely bad. And Frostbolt is actually a pretty decent spell, but realistically people are going to laugh at you if you're playing Frost in PvE environments. I just wanted to let you guys know why Demo, Fire, and Frost are uncommon instead of just telling you guys that it's bad and you blindly believing me. And since we have dual spec now, you might be able to find some use in them. Even the most complicated caster rotations are really not that scary, and that draws a lot of inexperienced players to the role, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Especially as a hybrid caster, it can allow you to get into better guilds than your normal level of play, mostly because you're filling an unwanted raid spot, and you don't even have to play a healer. For me personally, I was thinking about all this because I was considering playing Elemental as my third character, but now I think I might go for the Boomkin. I'm still not really sure. I probably won't want to play Hunter again in Wrath, and I want something comfortable to sink into for both the expansions. I also think it'd be a real breath of fresh air to be able to get and use all of the caster and spell power items in TBC that I don't normally touch. Thanks for watching the whole video. I didn't mention some things like races, itemization, professions, aesthetics, or raid responsibility, so let me know if any of that information is in high demand or really important to you. Subscribe to the channel to get a higher spell coefficient on your YouTube algorithm, and I'll see you next time.